Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. It's the afternoon of January 6th, 2017, and today is Epiphany. This is Epiphany, and the idea of Epiphany is you get to see what's what. You get to see what is divine. Maybe not here, but that's the idea of the holiday. You get to see what's divine, what is real, what is true, and the face of that is revealed to you, and that is Epiphany. It's often associated with the arrival of the three wise men in Bethlehem, and they get to see the face of Christ. So that's an epiphany. It means, obviously by extension, it means a moment of enlightenment. It's a moment of insight or creativity, right? A discovery, right? You have an epiphany. It means you've understood something fundamental and important. And you can call it also a theophany, right? You get to see God. And that's today. And of course, many folk customs about this that have been more or less swept aside by the march of Anglo-American consumerism. Certainly in Italy, there was always this idea that on Epiphany, this is actually when the kids got presents, that there was a good witch called La Befana. La Befana would bring you some presents if you had been good. Now, we're going to have an important statement about the significance of some of these religious holidays here in just a minute. But I guess we have to go to first things first. The first thing is that Trump is now officially elected President of the United States. This is the day. This is when the election is finally complete. And this occurred in a special session, a joint session of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. This took place in the House chamber, presided over by Vice President Joe Biden and by Speaker of the House Ryan. And what they do is they bring in the letters, in effect, right, the communications, the papers that they have received from the 51 places where these electoral votes are assigned, right? 50 states and the District of Columbia also gets some electoral votes. I can't be represented in Congress, but at least in this they are. And it's a joint session. Now, this was not super well attended, but it was there. And you had a bunch of tellers in the front row, and the tellers were there to do the count. So 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The Democrats were a guy called Congressman Robert Brady, Democrat of Pennsylvania, and Senator Klobuchar. And then on the other hand, we had Senator Blunt of Missouri and a Republican member of Congress. Now, you may remember that in the year 2000, there was a valiant attempt by the Black Caucus to protest some of the electoral votes, right? Remember that year there was a certain pushback. And the problem with attempting to slow the count, even if it's only that, is you must have the signature of a House member and you must have the signature of a senator. So in the most recent ones, or some of the most recent ones, it was like this. In the year 2001, because it's always in the year after, in the year 2001, the Black Caucus did everything it could to try to challenge some of these electoral vote tallies, and they failed. Because the trick is, according to, I believe, a statute, right? This is the U.S. Code. According to a statute, you've got to have the signature of a senator. And in 2001, there was no senator. In January of 2005, Senator Boxer of California came forward, and she lent her name to the effort, and then that led to a certain amount of debate, but it obviously didn't stop anything. George W. Bush was pronounced the president within a couple of hours at most. And this time, of course, Senator Boxer is no longer there. So the problem that was faced by the Democrats, and it's especially the Black Caucus and the women of the Black Caucus, as you'll see, who were most interested in attempting to raise some objections and clarifications and things of this sort. But they didn't have anybody from the Senate. Now, I think that is it's an interesting commentary. I really wonder. Some people might want to know, where was Bernie Sanders? Where were the great populists like, Sherrod Brown of Ohio or Elizabeth Warren? They don't seem to be interested in this issue. So then what happened was you had a series for specific states or just in general. You had objections raised. For example, the first state is obviously Alabama. So we had a member of the Black Caucus stand up, and I guess this must have been Barbara Lee. I'm not exactly sure who comes where in this order. But Barbara Lee stood up and essentially said, what about the Russian interference in the election? And Biden, who I think was frankly nastier than he needed to be, was always simply repeating his line, there can be no debate. Debate is not in order unless you have a statement, a call, an objection signed by a member of the House, at least one, and a member of the Senate. And there never was. So these simply were always dismissed. Everything that was brought up was dismissed. Barbara Lee stood up twice. Remember, this is probably the most independent thinker that we have in the Congress, right? She's the woman who voted against the Afghan war already in 2001, 2002. I guess she voted against the, or am I wrong? Maybe she voted against the Iraq war. She voted against one or the other. Sheila Jackson Lee was up there 4 times, and she protested, as did a couple of others. She protested the vote count from North Carolina. She protested about the voter suppression and the abuses under the now mangled Voting Rights Act. She voted. She tried to protest about South Carolina. None of this got her anywhere. Jamie Raskin of Maryland, and this is one of his first appearances in the House, objected specifically to the Florida results. This was the most detailed. Jamie Raskin, who used to be a Maryland state senator, represents a district near here, he said that there were 10 electors on the Republican slate who held other offices, and I guess he means federal offices. And if you, I'm going to check the U.S. code on this, but if you remember what Hamilton was saying about the electors, you want the electors to be people who don't have other government offices. So that was a specific objection from Raskin. But again, since he didn't have a senator, he was simply ruled out of order. Raul Grijalva of the Progressive Caucus also complained that the Voting Rights Act had been violated in North Carolina. I should have mentioned that Sheila Jackson Lee singled out South Carolina as a place where there had also been violations of the Voting Rights Act. And we'll wrap this part up in just a second here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Finishing up our coverage, right, that Trump has now been elected president in this joint session of the Congress, where what they do is you have a bunch of, I guess, clerks, aides, staffers who bring in these their sort of boxes with the communications that have been received from the 51 state capitals and 50 plus D.C., and then they open them up. And it's very perfunctory. They say, well, the the report on the electoral vote from California seems to be authentic, and they just go on, right? Each state gets half a minute at most, so the whole thing is over before you know it. We said Grijalva was complaining about the voting rights in North Carolina and other things, right? So the most common problem raised by the Democrats was the Russian interference, right? So one way or the other, whatever you want to think, the Black Caucus is convinced that there was Russian interference, and looks like the Progressive Caucus is also convinced that there was Russian interference. When Raskin raised his objection, as I recall, about the 10 electors who had other federal offices, Biden, after repeating his mantra that you have to have a senator, he said, look, it's over. And at that point, Ryan, sitting next to him, simply laughed. And I think this was a strange decorum. So what are the results? Let's give you the results. You're not going to hear a lot of this in too many places. Concerning the vote for president, there were 538 votes cast for president. Trump, 304. That means he wins. Hillary, 227. Then we had, let's see, Kasich got 1. Ron Paul got 1. We had I believe the leader of a Native American group got 1. Bernie got 1. And one other person got 3. I got to check who got the 3. But there it is. So that part is over. Concerning vice president, Pence got 305. Now, notice, Pence got 305, Trump got 304. And I guess that puts Pence 1 up. But in any case, Kaine got 227. And then we have a bunch of other candidates. Carly Fiorina got 1. Another Native American leader got 1. And another 2 votes went in various directions. So this was done. Now, there were protests. There were protests in the gallery, the visitors' gallery of the House. First demonstrator was a black woman, as I recall. And then we had a white demonstrator who was yelling, "One person, one vote." And I think it was a total of about 3 protesters who were ejected. Right? They were pushed out by the sergeant of arms, and Biden was urging that to happen. There was a lot of booing because the Democrats would try to make these little statements, and then they would get booed, and Biden would shut them down. So there it is. The election process is officially over. Now then, we have this question raised yesterday. We had fairly elaborate hearings in the Senate Armed Services Committee yesterday. This was addressed by Marcel Lettre, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. Now remember, most of the intelligence is in the Pentagon. So this is, even though his title is not as exalted as some of the others, Secretary of Defense for Intelligence is a very important guy. Then we had, in the middle, the post of honor, James R. Clapper, the director, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, the head of the ODNI, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and Michael S. Rogers, the head of the National Security Agency. And the question was, did Russia attempt, or did they succeed in interfering with the presidential election? Now, the line coming from these guys, and I think from Brennan above all, the one important guy not present, right? There were 3 witnesses. These were the 3 I've just said. Brennan, the head of the CIA, does not appear, but he and Comey are also on this same line, that there was Russian hacking and that the goal was originally to cause chaos and disruption. But when it became clear that the Republican ticket had a significant chance, then the effort was escalated. And according to Clapper, there's not just the hacking, in other words, the Podesta emails and the stuff that came out through Assange, but also the fake news and propaganda. And as Clapper puts it, whatever crack fissure they could find in our tapestry, they would exploit it. Now, today, and we're going to be interested to see the results, which we might get before the program is over. There is this meeting going on Fifth Avenue, and this is, I think this is Comey of the FBI. It's Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, and I think it is also then it's got Brennan of the CIA. So this has not apparently concluded. So where are we? The first thing I would say is it is absolute folly for anybody like McCain. We have in this hearing yesterday, and actually since this was the Senate Armed Services Committee, we had John McCain of Arizona, we had Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, and they're throwing around, I think, bellicose rhetoric that goes way, way too far. And in particular, I would invite everybody, stop talking about acts of war. Don't talk like this. This is dangerous talk. This stuff easily takes on a life of its own. This is not worth act of war. I can see a lot of people, a lot of commentators who really don't know what they're talking about, are preening and posturing, yelling act of war this and act of war that. To coin a phrase, cut it out. Enough already. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now again, stop with the act of war stuff. This kind of thing is dangerous enough without making it worse. And let's then, we'll have to focus on where we go from here. As far as I can see, this meeting with the president-elect and the intelligence community people began shortly between like 12 and 1 this afternoon, still apparently not concluded, or maybe they just don't say anything when they do conclude, but it's important to remain calm. Now, there is this 50-page document. Everybody's focused on this. There has been prepared this week an unprecedented intelligence report, 50 pages, circulated. It was shown to Obama yesterday. It's being given to Trump today, and this is being delivered essentially by Clapper, Brennan, and presumably Comey. And if not, we should make a note of that. So that is also likely, this report is likely to be made public next week to the broader public, and we'll be highly interested to see this. Now, what's our standpoint? It's always nice to have proof. For example, here in the front page of the Washington Post, I guess they're interested in pushing this forward. Here's their headline: Russians caught cheering Trump. U.S. intercepts reaction to November 8th vote and Obama gets this report we just mentioned. Here we go, by Adam Entus and Greg Miller. Senior officials in the Russian government celebrated Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton as a geopolitical win for Moscow, according to U.S. officials who said that American intelligence agencies intercepted communications in the aftermath of the election in which Russian officials congratulated themselves on the outcome. The ebullient reaction among high-ranking Russian officials, including some whom the U.S. thinks have knowledge of the cyber campaign to interfere in the elections, this contributed to the U.S. intelligence community's efforts or assessment that Moscow had indeed interfered in the election. And they also claim that they have identified specific individuals, people they call actors, and these are the people that would have taken the things like the Podesta emails, we think, or the premise of this seems to be, and then transferred that to WikiLeaks. So not clear where it all came from. The quote here, a senior U.S. official, unnamed, the Russians felt pretty good about what happened on November 8th, and they also felt pretty good about what they did. So, what do we make of all this? I'm afraid there are two things to say, right? One is we're still looking for proof. There is no conclusive proof, and I don't even mean courtroom quality proof. I simply mean just about anything that would be, accepted as high confidence in the intelligence community. We don't see the texts of these emails, the gloating from the post-election. There's a lot of stuff we just don't see, and again, proof is not forthcoming. Maybe there'll be actual proof in the document that's going to be put out next week. That's, however, going to be a sanitized version. That's going to be a declassified version. So therefore, that is dubious. However, the circumstantial evidence, I'm afraid, is there. And let me tick these off because we've talked about a lot of these before. The Putin press conference, the year-end press conference, had the tone of a partisan interference in the U.S. election. In other words, it was taking sides very, very clearly. And I think that is extremely unwise. That is not the way relations among sovereign states are supposed to go. Now, you can say, oh, yeah, you did it first. Okay, you started it. But this essentially gets us nowhere. This is not wise. This is not statesmanlike. I would not do it. I would urge others not to do it. The other one was the greetings, right? When the Russian government sent out greetings, they insisted on omitting President Obama and putting in the name of his successor. What does that seem to be? It seems to be to arrogate to oneself the ability to choose who's the president of the United States. If you're going to send greetings, send it to the legally established government. Same thing with the Astana conference, right? The Syrian conference supposedly meeting in Kazakhstan. You've got to invite the United States government, and that means if the president in office is the guy that you want the president, right? So you don't get to pick who the president is. You can wait if you want to, but to make a public issue out of this is extremely unwise. It is a very low road, and I think Russia is doing itself harm. I think Putin is harming himself. He's making essentially a lot of enemies, or taking a bunch of drifting enemies and marshaling them together, or reviving old enemies that might have turned away from this. And then if we look at, for example, RT today, you will see, well, the line is obviously that Hillary Clinton has to be denigrated, and the president-elect has got to be praised. And this is done in again, with a partisan edge, which I think is very strange. And then the various programs, right, approach this stuff from different angles. Right, one was to show violence against Republican supporters. Well, of course, such things exist, but that's a very one-sided view. I think that, and it's just irresponsible. In other words, if you're going to do that, then you have to be essentially prepared for whatever the other side is going to do to you. And then there was a sort of a man in the street, a sort of a jaywalking version where people were asked, did Moscow control your vote? And of course they say, no, I control my own vote. But I don't think that gets you anywhere. But I think this is a level of propaganda which I don't think advances the cause of clarifying these issues. So I think, unfortunately, this is now a bad situation. Now, the question of the U.S. intelligence community. We may have to pause in this and get back to it later. General Hayden. Now, when you have General Hayden, you have a 4-star general from the Pentagon, you have a former head of the National Security Agency, and a former head of the CIA. So he's a triple threat. And he comes on television to get interviewed and talks about low morale in the intelligence agencies because they feel that their work is not valued, that they, in some cases they do a lot of work and even take risks to gather intelligence, and that this is going to be totally disregarded, and that therefore morale is low and the officers can't be motivated. We'll get to this. We'll jump probably a segment now and come back to these issues in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., and now we have a special event on the show. As we've told you, this is Epiphany. This follows last night. Last night was 12th night. These are long-standing festivals of the Christian year. Today's Epiphany. So it's also really the official end of the Christmas season. So maybe it would be a good idea to look back and to sort of sum up Christmas 2016, 2017. The 12 days are over. And I thought this would be a good chance to hear from an actual student of theology. And this is my good friend, Brian McIntyre. Brian McIntyre is a founding member of the Tax Wall Street Party. He's been at some of our important meetings. He is a seminarian, that is to say he is pursuing a Master of Arts in Divinity, in actual theology, and he is a candidate for the ministry of the Presbyterian Church of the United States. So I would like to welcome Brian.
Good afternoon, Webster. My Christmas tree is still up and shining brightly.
I want you to know the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. has put on a radio ad saying precisely this, that there are 12 days, leave the decorations up. But we also have to talk about more serious things. So maybe I know you have a kind of a statement, which I would love to hear. So maybe you present the statement, and then we'll have a couple of minutes to exchange some further ideas. So please go right ahead.
Right. So I was inspired to write this because you and Daniela had been discussing nihilism pretty frequently in the run-up to Christmas on the other broadcast. And I believe that Christmas is the perfect antidote to nihilism because it represents the hope and the anticipation of better things to come in this year. So the message I wrote is as follows. At this time of year, it is important to point out the message of the 12 days of Christmas to both secular and religious elements alike. The takeaway from the birth of Jesus Christ is the re-sanctification and cleansing of a world that has fallen on hard times. The possibility that a God who created the universe came to us in the flesh is a gesture of reconciliation that cannot be taken for granted. It reminds us that there is a benevolent order behind the world we inhabit, and it behooves us to serve as one another's neighbor and benefactor in these times of great need. The other crucial message of Christmas is that the Creator came to us not only in physical form, but as an individual. Today we are bombarded with obfuscations about the identity of the human being, that we are solely defined by baseless categories of preference and privilege that are immutable and unchangeable. The concept of the dignity of the human person includes the uniqueness of each one of us. With the help of the Holy Spirit, each one of us can create new discoveries and ideas which can transform human life as well as world history. In this way, we are the protagonists of history and not powerless bystanders. As Dr. Tarpley has pointed out in recent broadcasts of the American system, St. Paul is the prime example of this phenomenon. He was not only a prolific theologian and metaphysician, but a highly capable organizer, probably the most effective organizer in history, judging by the institutional fruits of his labor. Whatever one's religious proclivities or allegiances, this has implications for us all. Every great movement begins with an individual or group of individuals before becoming something larger. And this, too, is an important point. Both Christ and St. Paul taught us that we cannot change the world by changing ourselves. Rather, it is something done in concert with other individuals, hence the need for mass movements in the promotion of reform and the general welfare of society. The individual and the movement are two sides of the same coin, and one cannot thrive without the other. In these nihilistic times, do not succumb to the despair and pessimism that has victimized generations past. We already know where that leads. This season, there is a light of truth and reason that shines in the darkness. As Dr. Martin Luther King once reminded us, the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. While God promises to do his part, there is ample room to contribute to this project on the basis of free will. Epiphany is the time when we are granted the privilege of seeing what is divine, real, and true. On this Epiphany Day, we appeal to you to join and fight with the Tax Wall Street Party for the sake of justice and goodwill towards all people. Thank you.
Wonderful. It's a great statement, a great contribution, and maybe people can now understand why we tried to highlight some of these things, right? That there is a wave of nihilism, that this is extremely bad, that nihilism essentially means the end of society, morality, just about anything as we've known them, and that you don't have to accept it, right? That there are countervailing forces at work in the world, right? In society. And I don't know, I was impressed by the statement of Pope Francis, right? The Urbi et Orbi this year on Christmas Day, and his the line was the culture of mercy, and you know how close that is to charity and the stuff that you're talking about there in that statement. Right. I heard you mention recently the idea of agape, which is one of the several Greek words that denotes love in the Greek language. And agape is closely related to charity. It's a sort of self-emptying kind of sacrifice and charity towards your neighbor, where you instinctively think about the other person rather than yourself first. And in a world where we have so much egotism, selfishness, cruelty, and so much trampling on the dignity of the human individual, agape, I think that is that's the answer in a nutshell, right? Because that's caritas, right? That's Christian love, right? Not hedonistic, not sensual, but I always think of it as based on this common human condition that we all have, right? That we're all finite, we're all creatures of needs, we depend on others, and the world can be improved, right? Where we You have to go. I would say go with Erasmus and the freedom of the will rather than his competition at the time.
Right. I would say the prevailing definition of love in the world today, or at least in American or Western society, is that of eros, which, as you mentioned, is sort of a romantic or erotic love. And this is a real cheapening of the human condition and the human individual. It essentially treats them as an object, and it treats the human experience as something that's not so much real. It's only really defined by the adorer's perspective, by the subjective reality of the person who is adoring the object. This is not the kind of charity and love that St. Paul and the Bible speaks about.
And I guess that gets us back to Syria in some ways, right? Where we have word today that there's still fighting going on, despite the truce, which appears to be holding. There is this town near Damascus, right? Wadi Barada, and that happens to be the source of the water for Damascus. And there had been fighting there, and the rebels now, the government had said the fighting is over, but the rebels are saying, no, the fighting is still going on. So this is not so far from the place where St. Paul, fell off his horse and he was Saul, and then when he woke up, because it took him a while to wake up, am I right? Maybe you know the story better than I do. But when he woke up, he was not Saul anymore, persecuting Christians, right? He was Paul, St. Paul, who was going to go out and organize this tremendous movement, as you say, the most effective political organizer, sure, in history by some counts, anyway.
Indeed.
So that's the Damascus Road conversion. All right, wonderful. Our segment is over. Brian, thank you very much. And we'll get you back. We'll be looking forward to you at some key points in the coming year where we need some spiritual guidance.
Anytime.
Thank you very much. Best of luck with your studies. We'll be right back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second half of today's edition of World Crisis Radio. It's the 6th of January. It's Epiphany. And let me just fill out that story, right? Remember that St. Paul had this experience on the way to Damascus. A light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground, knocked off his horse. And God says, why are you persecuting me? And he realizes that he's been on the wrong track. So he goes into the town. This is Acts of the Apostles. And he goes to visit a certain person. And that guy's house is located on the street called Straight. The street called Straight. And that is still there. I know it because 5 years ago or so, I walked the street called Straight. It is called the Via Recta. It's the street that bisects the city of Damascus. And it's a Roman road. It's got some Roman ruins. So all very fascinating. And it turns out that St. Paul was coming from Jerusalem. So it's likely that this experience was on the south side of the city. Now back to these conflicts with the intelligence agencies. We have to pay special attention to this stuff because these are, after all, the intelligence agencies, and their significance, let's say, is considerable. So Hayden, interviewed on cable TV yesterday, says that he's not going to be able to motivate his officers to gather intelligence if it won't be used to influence policy. The goal of many of these intelligence people is, by implication, they want their version of reality conveyed so that they can take part in forming policy. Now, let me make it clear. When we get into this stuff, I'm not taking sides. I'm not saying the CIA is any good. No. I hold no brief for either side, okay? I am an observer at this point, but I can tell you some of the things that are possibly going to happen. The word you get on again, the cable TV consensus is that General Flynn, Lieutenant General Flynn, is considered disgruntled because he was the head of the DIA, I guess. He was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency in the Pentagon, and he was fired by Clapper. So we're getting reports that Flynn has an intense dislike of Clapper, and or that Flynn has an animus against the office of the Director of National Intelligence. And that may have something to do with this report from a couple of days ago that talked about a shakeup, right, a revamping, a reorganization of the intelligence community. General Hayden, General NSA, CIA, also somewhat dismissive of Flynn, that he's brilliant at tactical intelligence, says Hayden, but not strategic. In other words, Flynn has little track record in the strategic area. And, of course, every time Clapper comes forward, everybody remembers that he lied to Congress. On the other hand, tell me an intelligence boss that hasn't, right? I don't think that's a surprise. I think that's pretty much par for the course when he said there's no surveillance of U.S. citizens. If you believe that in the first place, then maybe you should find another line of work. Maybe it's time to open a restaurant or something like that. Carl Bernstein is putting up the traditional call of Woodward and Bernstein, which is follow the money. In other words, to what extent are business interests, presumably undisclosed, influencing the treatment of Russia from the incoming administration? Now, the other thing that I think is important, I think, as Hayden says, and Clapper says it too, Clapper was asked in these hearings, you think morale in the CIA and so forth, has that suffered? And he says, yeah, well, it can't have helped, can it? It is extremely unwise. It is exceedingly unwise to antagonize these intelligence agencies. What can they do? They're a very large bureaucracy. If they simply decide to work to rule, so to speak, if they do a slowdown, then the slowdown has its effects. The other thing they can do is if their intelligence is ignored, they can leak it. And leaking, always a problem with the federal government. Sometimes it's authorized, sometimes not. And then you get into a big battle using, various legislation on the books that Obama has used, to be sure, but that might be used even more. Now, the other side of this is, as we get today in the papers, in break with precedent, Obama's envoys are denied extensions past Inauguration Day. So this is, again, something new, and I'm afraid this antagonizes a whole other class of people. Like up to now, we've been talking about the IC, the intelligence community, right? CIA, DIA, the 17 agencies, NSA, and so forth. National Reconnaissance Office, there are 17. But now you have the State Department, and you have these ambassadors that are considered to be the top of their profession. So the transition team has issued a blanket edict which requires that political appointees, I guess this means people who are not members of the Foreign Service, but still, to leave their overseas posts by Inauguration Day, according to some of the people who have been on the receiving end. This breaks with decades of precedent, which have normally extended grace periods of, weeks or maybe even months. That's now over. The mandate, the order, with no exceptions. A State Department cable was sent out on the 23rd of December, and it says that everybody has to leave by, I guess it says January 20th at noon, because that's when the administration changes. So the New York Times notes this could mean that there would not be full plenipotentiary Senate-confirmed ambassadors representing the president in Germany, Canada, Britain, France, Italy, Japan, you name it, right? Depending on the status of these people. I believe the U.S. ambassador to Canada has already resigned. I think he sort of preempted this entire thing. This seems to be limited to political ambassadors, some of them major donors, right, as we followed. But again, this is not exactly orderly, put it that way. It does create a hiatus. There's also the tradition that some of these ambassadors have children that are in school, and they don't want to yank the children out of the school. So the New York Times tells you about what's going on in Costa Rica, the Czech Republic, and so forth. So I think this is going to rub a lot of these guys the wrong way, right? It's not the tradition. It seems brusque. It seems to be not what they were expecting. So again, here's another large bureaucracy. They even show you an ambassadress from the U.S. with the Prime Minister, Elio Di Rupo of Belgium some years back. Ambassador Denise Bauer in Brussels would like to stay there until her daughter finishes high school. Now, these people are then on their own, the diplomatic corps, right? So, again, now what we therefore have is a couple of other things that have come in. We'll get to those in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. To keep up with all of this from Monday through Thursday, many days of the week, go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. This week we had a major unit on the stock market situation. I hope to give you a quick summary here, but having the broadcast every day allows me to do much more. So the Dow didn't quite get to 20,000 today, but it's close. And I think when it does get close, some people are going to look at that and start to take stock. And who's going to be wanting to buy stock at Dow 20,000? I don't know. It seems like that particular bubble might run out of steam, and you've got to be aware of that. So I'll try to talk about that. But the best way is to subscribe to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv. The moves on this intelligence front, I think, are very complex and very, very interesting. James Woolsey, former head of the CIA, I believe under Clinton, had been at least advising the transition team. Now he says he won't be doing that anymore. So there's another CIA boss who is no longer closely associated. Concerning the Director of National Intelligence, the word seems to be former Senator Dan Coates of Indiana. Dan Coates has been ambassador to Germany under George W. Bush, and during 2014 he was banned from Russia. Whether Coates is still banned from Russia, I do not know, but there are some people who think that the sort of hard line coming from Coates on Russia might balance the views of some other people, right? People like maybe Flynn. So this is some idea of this intensive intelligence warfare. Now, let's look at some historical examples, right? We always want to have some historical depth, and I would like to take you back to a crisis which is all but forgotten. It is one of the most neglected crises of the post-war period, and it's even something that was almost a thermonuclear confrontation, right? Maybe on the scale of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this is the so-called tilt crisis of 1970 into 71. And this is Richard Nixon, advised by Henry Kissinger at the National Security Council, and Secretary of State William Rogers. But really, Kissinger doing the entire thing. So it's from 70 to 71. At this point, we have the dictator of Pakistan, Yahya Khan, trained at Sandhurst, the British equivalent of West Point. He has elections, and the pro-autonomy, pro-independence Awami League of Mujibur Rahman wins tremendous plurality, 167 out of 169 parliamentary seats in East Pakistan. This is what's Bangladesh now. Then it was East Pakistan. And in effect, the Pakistani army, according to most reports, launched a campaign of mayhem in East Pakistan with the estimates of victims from 500,000 to 3 million dead, right? Somewhere in that range. The Awami League and anybody who might have wanted the independence of East Pakistan was targeted. Now, here's the big thing. Nixon and Kissinger by now are looking to have the rapprochement with China. Think about this now. Rapprochement with China, which had been a shooting war enemy in the Korean War, right? Less than 20 years before this, the U.S. had been essentially at war with China, although not officially. So Nixon and Kissinger launched an effort to try to whitewash what the Pakistani military had done in what was on its way to becoming Bangladesh. And Nixon put out a memo in his own handwriting to all hands, State Department, everybody. Don't squeeze Yahya at this time. So don't get tough with the brutal president of Pakistan, Yahya Khan. Nixon says, I want to tilt in favor of Pakistan in the crisis. So tilt. This has gone, to the extent it's remembered at all, this is known as the tilt crisis of essentially 1971. Why was this? Because Nixon and Kissinger wanted to use Yahya Khan, since he was sort of allied with China against India, right? Both China and Pakistan disliking India. There had been this 1962 exchange of gunfire along the border, a border war, if you want. So the tilt. Now, here's the problem. The bureaucracy. Nixon, let me read some of what I wrote now, some decades back. An isolated president who is somehow not in touch with the various parts of the federal bureaucracy. Here we go. Kissinger and Nixon were isolated inside the Washington bureaucracy on the issue of the tilt. Secretary of State William Rogers, an old friend of Nixon, but a more traditional diplomat, he was reluctant to support Pakistan, and this was the prevalent view in Foggy Bottom, in the State Department, and in the embassies around the world. And as I wrote then, Tricky Dick and Fat Henry were isolated from the vast majority of congressional opinion, which expressed horror and outrage over the extent of the carnage being carried out week after week, month after month by Yahya Khan's armed force. You can read this in the unauthorized biography of George H.W. Bush. It's online for free. And if you want to do me a favor, go buy a copy, because it's better to have the paper version. On July 31st, 1971, Kissinger exploded at a meeting of the senior review group when a proposal was made that the Pakistani army should get out of Bengal. Why is it our business how they govern themselves, said Kissinger. The president wants to tilt in favor of Pakistan. And I'll be right back. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember, follow us from Monday through Thursday every evening. AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. Support my work, and you'll be, I think, amply rewarded with the content. July 31st, Kissinger exploded at a meeting of the senior review group, on a typical interagency group, an IG. They wanted to say, get the Pakistani army to withdraw from Bengal. What is that? Our business. It's not our business, says Kissinger. And I quote, the president always says tilt in favor of Pakistan, but every proposal I get from inside the U.S. government is in the opposite direction. Sometimes I think I am in a nut house. This went on for months. On December 3rd, 71, at the meeting of the Kissinger's Washington Special Action Group, Kissinger exploded again, saying, I've been catching unshirted hell every half hour from the president, who says we're not tough enough. He really doesn't believe we're carrying out his wishes. He wants to tilt towards Pakistan, and he believes that every briefing or statement is going the other way. Well, George H.W. Bush at the United Nations was with him on the tilt, right? He's Pakistan, anti-India. Kissinger writes in his memos, I knew that George Bush, our able UN ambassador, would carry out the president's policies. But some of these other guys, not. Indira Gandhi came to Washington, and then at various points, the Pakistani Air Force launched air attacks against Indian facilities, right? They didn't work so well. Eventually, this led to tremendous human suffering, tremendous amount of killing on the ground, and it led to the independent state of Bangladesh. But now here's the thing: December 10th, 1971, Kissinger, and this may be the part you don't remember, ordered the U.S. Navy to create Task Force 74. The British at this point were pulling out from east of Suez. That's what we're talking about here. The Vietnam War was at its height. The U.S. had 2 or 3 ships in the entire Indian Ocean. So Kissinger says, pull forces away from the Gulf of Tonkin, from the famous Yankee Station, and send them to Singapore, and then send them into the Indian Ocean. So that's Task Force 74, and the key part of it is this somehow between the U.S. and the Soviets at that time, this became a really hot situation, which has been generally forgotten. The first time the Nixon administration used the hotline was in the midst of this crisis, right? The other time is during the Kippur War of October 1973. But here it is now, leading to this, in effect, a thermonuclear confrontation. Let me just get you the good quote here with Task Force 74. So, on December 12th, 1971, Nixon, Kissinger, and Al Haig meet in the Oval Office on a Sunday morning for a war council. Kissinger says this was a crucial meeting, the first decision to risk war in the triangular Soviet-Chinese-American relationship. So, during Nixon's grand jury testimony in 1975 to the Watergate Special Prosecution Task Force, the former president insisted that the United States had come, quote, close to nuclear war during the Indo-Pakistani conflict. According to one attorney who heard Nixon's testimony in 1975, Nixon said, we, the U.S., had threatened to go to nuclear war with the Russians. And this is most likely this action on December 12th. Task Force 74 was by now steaming through the Straits of Malacca and into the Indian Ocean. The world media were paying attention, and at 11:30 a.m. U.S. Washington Eastern Time, Kissinger and Haig sent the Kremlin a message over the hotline. And this is the first time it was ever used. So according to Kissinger, the hotline message was an ultimatum that the Soviets had to respond to the U.S. ultimatum, stop supporting India, or Nixon would order Bush to start doing certain things at the UN Security Council that would be irreversible. And, what else was in there? Right? As far as I know, these documents have never really been revealed, but it was brinksmanship. And, that's one side of it. That's bad off, right? A brush with World War III. But the other side of it is these leaks, right? The leaks out of the Washington bureaucracy became a very significant problem. Now, later on, we had during the Kippur War, we had Jack Anderson leaking diplomatic cables. This is not so different from the present time. There's a cable that was leaked about what the Israeli diplomats were up to. These were also exchanges with the government of Egypt and so forth. But Nixon became obsessed with the idea of leaks against the tilt, leaks by Jack Anderson on the Middle East, and then, of course, the Pentagon Papers of June 1971. So look at all this interesting stuff we're digging up. Remember that the Ellsberg, Assange, Snowden group has at various times, or their backers, let's say, their supporters, have tried to present them as a kind of apostolic succession of leakers. Well, the Ellsberg leak, right, the Rand Corporation nuclear planner, his work, along with Morton Halperin and Leslie Gelb, this was then the thing that drove Nixon in that summer of 1971 to say, Kissinger would come to him and say, Mr. President, we're going to be a laughingstock in the world if we don't get control of these leaks. So Nixon did it, and he said, okay, we'll set up a new intelligence operation, not really an agency, but a significant thing. We're going to set that up in the White House. What are we going to call it? Well, since they're designed to prevent leaks, let's call them the plumbers. And who do we get on the plumbers? Well, we get Howard Hunt, one of the most famous CIA operatives of the post-war period. We get James McCord, one of the great experts in electronic surveillance and similar things in the history of the U.S. intelligence community, of the agency. And you get Gordon Liddy, who had, I believe he had some connections to other intelligence groups. So those are the plumbers, and they go and they snoop the Democratic National Committee. Look at all these interesting things we're touching. They go and snoop the Democratic National Committee. They go back, what is it, more than once. They go back twice. I think they have to go back the third time. I'll check it. But they had to go back several times, and then they finally got arrested. And that Watergate was on, and the downfall of Nixon was set in train. So we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Let's wrap up last segment. Again, I urge you, go and buy a copy of my book. But if you can't manage that, take a look at Chapter 11 on Tarpley.net. Chapter 11 of George Bush, the Unauthorized Biography. I urge you to buy it on paper. It's going to be worth something more in the coming years, no matter how many times it's brought out. It is an underground classic. So that's the story, from the leaks to the plumbers. And what it shows is, if you're going to set up anything separate inside the White House, outside of the normal institutional setup, make sure you're very clear, you're very certain that the people you put in there are reliable, not like Howard Hunt, McCord, Gordon Liddy, and so forth, right? Of course, the implications of this are that the sort of center-left version of Watergate is a complete confusion. It's just completely inaccurate. Now let's talk about some things. The austerity people are hard at work on Capitol Hill. We're told that the march to dismantle Obamacare, this is going on. And I would urge people not to have illusions about what this will look like. I think there are some Republicans who are pulling back in the sense that they're afraid if we make a sort of a big gesture of abolishing Obamacare, then the various insurance companies will flee. The whole thing will collapse, and 20 to 25 million, and by implication 30 million by the end of the year or so, they will be without health insurance, and they won't be happy with the Republican Party. Here today, we're getting that the Republicans, as they wipe out Obamacare, want to get subsidies for insurance companies, so they will stay in the marketplaces after Obamacare is repealed. So they want to help the insurance companies, not the average people, right? The people who voted for them, who are going to be the victims, because they will have their health care coverage stripped. In the course of this, we hear a lot about high-risk pools. I would like to direct your attention to the website of the Commonwealth Fund. It's a think tank here in Washington. Why high-risk pools still won't work. So they say they want it. This was this, you should listen to this Orwellian interview of Marsha Blackburn, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who is, she's the vice chair of one of these Republican subgroups. So this is an important person. This is not just anybody. And she's telling you, it's going to be great. We're going to put Medicaid under the control of the states, and they'll do such a wonderful job administering it. Yeah, wait a minute. What is that? You're going to put it into the hands of Scott Walker. He shows, the way he wields the knife. But then she says, don't worry. If you have a pre-existing condition, we're going to accommodate you with a high-risk health insurance pool. That's going to cover you if you have a pre-existing condition. Okay. Here's what the Commonwealth Fund has to say. Gene P. Hall, writing about a year ago, the high-risk pools are suggested as a viable alternative to the Obamacare ban on pre-existing condition exclusions in the individual market and the marketplace. My recent analysis of high-risk pools explains why these entities simply are not a realistic alternative to coverage requirements under the ACA, Obamacare. In a nutshell, here's what we can say about high-risk pools. One, they are prohibitively expensive to administer. They are, two, prohibitively expensive to consumers to purchase. And three, they offer much less than optimal coverage. They have annual limits and they have lifetime limits. In other words, if you reach the ceiling, then too bad for you. They have coverage gaps, very high premiums, very high deductibles. So here's a high-risk pool. She gives an example. What are you going to pay for premiums, and what are you going to have to pay out of pocket, right? What's your deductible going to be between the marketplace and the high-risk pool? So if you're at 200% of the federal poverty level, your marketplace coverage would cost you $1,448 health insurance. But the high-risk pool is going to cost you $7,000 a year. And that is combined with, even for these very modest means people, $6,350 in deductible. So you're going to be paying $13,000 a year for health insurance. And what's it going to be? In many cases, if the deductible, say, is $25,000, as in some cases these things can be, the limit per year might turn out to be $75,000. Here, in addition to these high premiums, enrollees in state-based high-risk pools faced annual deductibles as high as $25,000 that you pay before you get a penny, and annual coverage limits as low as $75,000. So you have to pay $25,000, and then maybe if it goes beyond that, but not beyond $75,000, you'll get something. If it goes over $75,000, you're back on your own again. So this is worse than donut holes. This is like a Swiss cheese of all kinds of things. So take a look at the Commonwealth Fund and repeal Obamacare. I think the key word, right? The word that Schumer repeated several times. There's a danger of chaos. So this is a political hot potato. Now, we've got the Republicans also throwing overboard their commitment to fiscal responsibility. Are they concerned about deficits? Well, of course they were, as long as Obama was in power. But now we're getting lots and lots of Republicans on Capitol Hill saying, we don't care about deficits and total national debt. I'm reminded of Dick Cheney, who once quipped, Reagan taught us that deficits don't matter. Yeah, Reagan tripled the national debt, tripled it with his supply-side trickle-down economics. Now we're back in the realm of supply-side trickle-down economics, and the situation is that the public debt of the United States is going to rise by $10 trillion over the foreseeable period ahead. Now, there are some who still don't want to go along with this. I guess we have Rand Paul saying that this is not wise. We've got Dave Bratt. You'll remember Bratt was the one who engineered the ouster of Eric Cantor, the Republican majority leader at the time that he departed. So the Republican Party has just thrown overboard its principal ideological plank. In other words, this speaks to cynicism. Maybe it's an example of nihilism, that there's a party that doesn't really believe in anything. So this will be a deficit of, again, $10 trillion. The public